¿Cómo se dice mariposa en inglés?
You say lift or elevator.
¿Seguro?
Of course, you see. Both go floor to floor.
Para fiestas y posadas. Welcome. Today I'm going to speak about three terms primarily. One of them is indio or Indian. The other one is indigo or indigo. So these match, so you're going to learn some Spanish history as well as English when it comes to linguistics. And we have Hindu, right? Now, let's talk a little about the history. So Hindu, this was borrowed from French. So Spanish borrowed it from French. It actually means the same thing. So Hindu and Indian mean the same thing, interestingly enough. This simply comes from French. Now, indio comes from indigo comes from indigo comes from indicus. So this would be the Latin, this is the Spanish derivation. So this is how we go from Latin to Romance to Spanish. Now, indigo is also a Spanish term, but there's something interesting here that I will mention in a bit. Let me just explain the derivation. So from indicus, we get to indigo. So this does not exist in this lesson. It's just a step so that I can speak about the other two. So US generally becomes an O. So US UM in Latin generally becomes an O in Spanish, not always, like album. But we do have that, and this is just a simple process where we have vowel lowering. So what that means is the U, in this case, goes down to an O. We can ignore the consonants. And that's all that happens, and this is very common going from Latin to Romance to Spanish. If you think of Marcus, right? Marco or Marcos, that exists as well. The U goes into an O. All right. Now, after that, what we have is we have this velar stop. So voiceless velar stop between two vowels. Well, it's going to become voiced. So this is the complement right here. So this is a velar voiced stop, right? But something else that happens in Spanish is this will become a fricative. So that's lenition, which is a weakening of a sound. But it can weaken so much and so far that eventually the sound can disappear altogether. And that's what we have over here. So from indigo, we get indio, so indigo, Indian. That's where it comes from. Now, one of the interesting things are that according to Corominas, and if you're not familiar with the work of Corominas, he has some wonderful work in Spanish linguistics, etymologies, just the language in general. According to the works of Corominas, indigo came to the Spanish language in 1555, which is interesting because this would mean that this word dropped and then it came back. So it probably disappeared, wasn't used very much, and then it came back. More than likely, which does happen from time to time. Sometimes we will have, say, an original word in some language, for example, Latin, and then language begins to change. We get to the final word. That would be the last step. And then there's a word in between that eventually will be learned from, maybe borrowing from another language, maybe academia, maybe church, or something along those lines. And those would be the learned words. So keep that in mind. We have the heritage word, which is the very end, and then we can have learned words where speakers relearn a previous word. So probably that's what happened. And the reason why I say this is interesting is because Columbus, 1492, sailed the ocean blue, right, as it goes, which means that this concept already existed, but somehow this disappeared. But keep in mind that there was already trade going on with the area of Indostan, right, Indostan. So Christopher Columbus was not intending to sail to India because India, as we know it now as a country, did not exist as it is now. And before I go into some of the uses and more of the history, we have to be clear about something. A lot of people make a lot of mistakes judging historical times based on modern experiences. And this is erroneous for a variety of reasons. The other thing too is a lot of people forget that geography in general has changed over time quite a bit. If you think about it, for those of you who were born or grew up, I should say, in the 80s, 90s, that area, how much has European geography changed? Quite a bit. I mean, just think of Germany. Do any of you remember Czechoslovakia? Czech Republic, Slovakia? All those other areas, right? Geography changes. So based on this, India as a country as we know it now did not exist. This is a product of this general region obtaining its independence from the British Empire, for example. But we did have Indostan, which was a vast region, what is now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, a variety of other things. Have you heard of Indonesia? That sounds quite similar too, doesn't it? So Columbus was actually sailing to Indostan, or the Indies, plural. That's the reality. So one of the things that I recommend is for you to find letters of relations, or cartas de relación. These are letters that were written by different individuals to the Spanish crown. For example, Christopher Columbus, Hernán Cortés, and many others. Now, if we look at Christopher Columbus in one of his letters, one of the first quotes that we have is the following. Por cual sabéis cómo en 33 días pasé de las Canarias a las Indias. As well you know, or for which you know, how in 33 days I passed from the Canary Islands to the Indies, or the Indias. That's what we have here. And this is something very, very important to keep in mind. So now I'm going to start talking about the use. Now, if we look at this word, if we look this word up in the dictionary, we are going to find that one of the entries, for example, in the Spanish Royal Academy, RAE, Real Academia Española, is that somebody who's Hindu, is somebody who is from India. All right, makes sense. It's borrowed from French, referring to peoples of the area. All right, fair enough. Now let's look up indio. Indio, so it will say India or Indostan. Now let's look at indio. One of the entries will be somebody from India. Oh, interesting. So they both mean the same thing? Somewhat. Yeah, maybe. Well, we're missing some very important context, and one of it is the following. India, or that region as we know it now, has been more important to the British than it has to the Spanish. Far more important. Which is why we generally had two companies, for example, in English. We would talk about, well, forget about the companies. Those were very powerful companies, but two areas. We had the East Indies and the West Indies. And then eventually you have like the West India Company, etc. And then you get IPAs as well, for those that enjoy those drinks. But we have the West Indies and the East Indies. This is the reason why. Now, was it a mistake to call people from the Americas Indian at first, or indio? Yes, it was a mistake, right? But they were going to Indostan, and it's the Indies, and that's what happened. So how do you correct that mistake? Very simple. You have the Indians of the West and the Indians of the East. Problem solved. No big deal. Now, here's the other thing, too, that you will find in the dictionary. So this word, you will also find that it describes somebody of the original peoples of the Americas. Oh, okay. So it could be both. Based on context, yes. The part that can make it confusing for some individuals is we lost the concept of East and West. So an East Indian versus a West Indian. Had we kept that, it would have simplified things. But nowadays, I guess some people will say in English Indian and then American Indian. All right, fair enough. Spanish, we have Hindu, East Indian. Indio, although it can be used for both, it would be preferable to use this just for the American counterpart, and that solves the problem. Very simple. Now, a quick little note. Some individuals too, and I have no idea why there's so many controversy in politics behind this. It's really not that hard, as I hope you will learn from this video. The reason why we use Indian is because it doesn't matter what language, what pre-Columbian language in the Americas you look for, No language has a collective term for all of the peoples in the Americas, at least to my knowledge. And this is a problem because we want a collective term. If I am speaking about cars, for example, just an example, if I want to refer to them all collectively, I say cars. I don't go about naming every single make and model. That makes no sense. It would take too long. I don't know them all. Saying cars, we're speaking about that collective group. The very same way, I'm not going to be talking about the Flemings, the Catalans, the Basque, the Serbians, etc., and just naming them all. I am just going to group them as European. That would be an example. If I want to be slightly more specific, but not too specific, I'll group them as maybe Western European versus Eastern European, Spanish versus Polish. That's an example. So the point is that Indian, American Indian, West Indian, indio, is just a collective term. Now, there's nothing negative about that term. When this term was applied to the peoples of America, there was no negative connotation. That's the other incredibly important thing, which I find fascinating. The people that want to get rid of this term because they say it's derogatory, they're the ones that are being derogatory. And this is the reason why. I just said this term was never used or used to describe a people in a derogatory form initially. They were just describing the people they thought were from Indostan or the Indies. The derogatory meanings, you will find several, one of them being, for example, naive. So in the Americas, let's just focus on Spanish-speaking America, indio or Indian can be used to refer to somebody in context as naive, right? This word did not mean naive and then applied to Indians. It's the other way around. The word was given to the peoples, but then qualities from the peoples in certain areas gave this word different connotations and context. So to give you more information, Christopher Columbus arrives, there's a priest in the ship, and the individual describes the people as very naive and innocent and calls the people children in God, right? Niños de Dios or niños en Dios. So in God, en Dios, of God, de Dios. Now a quick little note, indio does not come from in God. I mean, it's a cute etymology. I'm not going to go into detail, but it wouldn't work because in would be like without, and they weren't the people without God. They weren't the people in God either. But it's a cute etymology. This comes from that, referring to that and that. But anyway, that's a debate for another time. The point is, he did describe the individuals as naive because they weren't familiar with many things. For example, they would grab swords by the blades and cut themselves. There were a lot of things they did not know the uses for, and they committed many mistakes when trying to handle these objects. Or a group of them were easily convinced to board a ship, which I didn't mention the Spanish version, but the Spanish queen was completely appalled. She was completely against it. Some individuals got some severe scoldings for that. But these are the reasons why. So long story short, whatever negative connotations exist, they came after. So the best thing we can do is, one, understand the historical time frame, understand geography changes, which goes back to historical time frame, understand that this just refers to peoples, and then in order to solve the problem with all the negative connotations, we just need to teach all the beautiful qualities and cultural aspects that all of these groups have. Many of them have influenced our modern society. And that's the reality. That's how we change that. So anyway, you can fight over a term all day long. The reality is, half the time, when it comes to something like this, some people are just going to demonstrate how little they know about language and the context as well. So this being said, let me recap on the main reason why you're watching this video. So, in sum, Hindu, Indio, these are the same terms. This one was borrowed from French. This one goes through the whole derivation from Latin to Romance to Spanish. Indio comes from indigo. Indigo, surprisingly, was lost. Didn't come back into the Spanish language until 1555. Christopher Columbus, 1492, is not sailing to India because it didn't exist as we understand it today. Christopher Columbus was sailing to the region of Indostan, which is the Indies, where the mistake comes from. So now in Spanish, an easy way to solve, because we lost the whole concept of East and West Indies, is East Indies, West Indies. And that's it for today. So thank you very much, and I'll catch you in the next one.